Hey, thank you for the comment. Please stick around for the entire video because I'm going to give you a lot of information and a plan on how to get through this. So let's go. So here's the thing. The first step you have to do is you have to understand what the activities you are. So in a sheet of paper, you summarize all the activities, right? You have activity one, activity two, all the way to 10, depending on how many activities, and these are jobs. How many jobs do you have that you're responsible for or that your team is doing? Then you put the frequency. For example, and this right here is frequency per week, 10 times per week, 20 times a week, and 50 times a week. That's the example. The reasonable expectation is how long does it take in minutes? This first one takes 5 minutes. It's done 10 a week, 45 minutes, 20 times a week, 60 minutes. It does 15 times a week, right? That's the activity list. So then you just do the math. It's 0.83 hours for this one, 15 hours a week for this one, and this one requires 50 hours. If you add it up, divide it by 40, because that's a 40-hour work week for one employee, you need 1.6 headcount overall, right? This is kind of a rough estimate of what your workload is based on the work that you have. So for you, I would capture 80% of your activities to make sure that you have everything. Then if you have 10 people and the work requires, the math says you need 12, then of course, then you have a staffing issue, right? But here's the thing. This right here, this could be wrong as well, right? So just for now, create the activity list and do the math and see how many people do you need and how many people you actually have. If there's a deficit, that's a reason why you're working. If you have too many people, right, there's something else going on. But this is kind of a quick assessment. The second thing, make sure you're tracking your KPIs, productivity, efficiency, cost per unit. That way to see how you're trending overall, because it's important that you understand how are you performing overall, because if you fix this, because this right here could be up or down, preferably it's going up in productivity, but this gives you a gauge for right now on what you're performing, because at some point you're going to fix this reasonable expectation here. This is the thing you're going to look at and fix, but we're not going to do it just yet. Just make sure you're tracking this. Now, the other part is that you've got to establish a weekly meeting with your boss focused on KPIs and performance. Nothing else, right? You want to focus on how you're performing, talking about this number. Hey, this is how many hours I need for the week. This is how many people I have. Make that conversation based on data, right? Because with your boss, you're giving them a data and say, hey, boss, I need 65 hours. I need 1.6 people. I only have one person. That's just an example. But that's the number you want to throw out there in every single meeting and say, hey, boss, I need X number of hours. That's 12 people. I only have 10. I'm having to work. It's going to skew this, because if you're working, it's going to skew this right here. And we'll fix that here in a little bit. But that's the conversation. But just make sure that you're capturing all the activities correctly and the correct reasonable expectation, right? So that you can get an accurate number. And this right here is the conversation that you're having with this and productivity. Now, the other thing is your skills assessment. You've got to make sure, because we have a matrix, right, that we created and you can use, where you have employee 1, 2, 2, 3, and you have the skill 1, right, skill 2, and skill 3, skill 3. Then you assess that skill based on one between a value of 1 through 4, right? And it's important that you understand how they're trained within that skill set that contributes to this activity, right? Because you might have people that are underqualified, that don't know how to do the job doing these activities. That is why it's taking you so long, because they're not meeting the reasonable expectation. And that's why you might say, hey, I have enough people, but guess what? They're not meeting the reasonable expectation because, one, they're not maybe trained correctly. That's why it's so important to assess your skill sets, because then you can quickly analyze to see if your employees have the right skill sets to do the actual activities to meet that expectation. If you do this correctly, you're going to see some huge gaps, especially if you put tenure here. You'll see people with like 10 years with no training and only skilled in one specific skill set. That's an issue. That happens all the time. So if you have people that are like 2 years and they are qualified in every single one, those are probably your top performers. But if you've got people, they were like 5 years and they're only trained or qualified in one specific skill set, and you might have 10 different skill sets. That's an issue. Then you say, hey, employee, guess what? We're going to begin training you up on these other skill sets so you can help us with this work so that we can contribute to this right here. Because again, you might have the right people, but your skill sets might be mismatched, right? So once you fix that, guess what? You're going to start increasing. Once you fix this, if this is the issue, then people are going to start doing more work. Then you don't need any more people. Then slowly but surely, you're going to get out of doing the work. But you got to do this right here. But the most important part is this meeting with your boss to say, hey, boss, this is the number of people that I need. This is what I'm doing. This is what I'm seeing. I'm going to start training people to make sure that they're doing these activities correctly so that we can meet that. And that's the cycle. Now, the key thing here as well is that this reasonable expectation that you create, right, at the very beginning might be an estimate, right? That's okay. If you don't have standards of work from your organization or something as an engineer, you can use your data to say, hey, my average is 62 minutes or 45 minutes. And you can plug that in there, right? If you have the data. If you don't, guess what? You're gonna have to use your best estimate of what these reasonable expectations are at the very beginning. But once you fix this process, guess what? You're going to notice that these reasonable expectations are going to get better. So within 3 to 4 months, you reanalyze and say, hey, instead of this activity being 60 minutes, it's actually 45. You're actually saving 15 minutes overall times 50. And that is your savings. Your value added as a manager is that you're saving 15 minutes times 50 overall through a period of 52 weeks. And guess what? That is your value added as a manager to save cost overall. They're not going to do work any faster. That means you're shaving off inefficiencies because you did this, because you did this, because you did this, and you just shaved off 15 minutes. And they're not working any faster. They're just more efficient. And that is the value that you provide. But I suggest you go through this process so that you can slowly start getting away from doing employee work. You just have to do the math. Or the other choice that you have choices. Or the other choice is that you just tell your boss, guess what? I'm not going to do employee work. But here's the thing. If you want to learn your craft as a manager, you've got to do this exercise because it's important that you clearly understand how to do this exercise because guess what? You're going to be in the same boat in a different job. And guess what? You have to learn this skill. Because if you're in the same situation in another job, you can say, hold on for a second. Before I do any work, I'm going to do an assessment of what it is so I can figure this out. Then we can have a discussion. That's you're being wise now, right? Now you're being a little bit more wiser about these things, right? And making decisions. What I just showed you is an assessment as a manager that you have to do in order to lead your team. And don't do this isolation. Involve your team, get buy-in. Involve your people in this process so that you can train other and teach other leaders to do the same thing. And here's the thing. Managers in this situation are very reactive. Here's some words of advice. Don't get distracted with the conversation that you're having with your boss. Because if your boss doesn't do this correctly, and chances are, if your boss is not helping you get out of the situation you're in, he or she's not going to know what you're talking about. Show him or her the math. Show him or the KPIs, the skill assessment, the activity list. Show them the data, and they cannot argue with you about what is the actual truth. If you want to learn more on how to do this, I'm proposing a master class. If you're interested in learning this, please let me know in comments that you're interested. I am hosting a master class. So again, it'll teach you everything you need to know and how to do this scenario so that you get the upper hand on your boss.